happen is you will just get power, but you won't know what to do with it. So again, Christopher Wallace says nicely, a jerk will just become a more effective jerk. Because that's what yoga does. It gives you power, makes your body and mind incredibly strong. But if you don't know what that power is for, if you don't really understand what it is you're feeling, that is, if you don't really have, yes, if you don't really have the theoretical framework to contextualize your practice, practice alone won't do it for you, you know. However, most people, they don't, their problem is too much theory, too little practice. Very rarely do we find people with too much practice and no theory, though it does happen. So today really our lecture is going to be about moving from theory to practice. But the first disclaimer is that theory is indispensable. Remember last week during Buddha Purnima, we talked about Buddhism, and the first, and it's hard to say the first since it's a wheel, right? So you can kind of look at it any which way. But one of the spokes in the Ashtanga Marga, the eight-spoked wheel, or the eightfold path of Buddhism, or we could say the central spoke is Samyak Drishti, which means right view, right spiritual orientation, right theoretical framework. It's only from that that you get all the other samyaks, all the other right livelihood, right mindfulness, right meditation. So you must first understand what this is all about, and only then can you put it into practice. So we'll recap some of the central ideas that we've developed together over the past few weeks, and we'll look into the possibility of these ideas to radically free you from the suffering that seems to be your day-to-day experience of life. Okay, first thing, death. Now, death seems to be one of the biggest sources of grief in life. The very fact that you are going to die causes you to feel an abject terror that is often felt not towards death, but to other mini instances in which you are reminded of death. So, losing all your money, for instance. You come up against your fear of death when you look at your money and you conflate your finances with security and you conflate your security with livelihood. Do you see? The fear of death is so pervasive that it rears its heads the moment you think of your money, for instance. And it's hard to find a person in this world without some degree of financial distress. You know, I think it was Quincy Jones. Westerfer is a musician in the room, he'll correct us. I think it was Quincy Jones who said, God walks out of the room when you start thinking about money. But all this obsession about money, about growing wealth, is really an obsession with security, and that is really an obsession with immortality, and that is really a fear of death, you know, coming in one way. Then also we fear obscurity. I mean, we want people to remember our name, we want people to know us, and so we chase fame. It can be in the form of being like a superstar, or it can be in a small way, like trying to increase followers, you know, or something like that. We're all of us afraid of obscurity, because we're worried that if people don't know us, that if people forget us, we're going to die. You know, so there again, we feel that fear of death. So whether it's pertaining to money, whether it's pertaining to fame, the root cause of all of your distress and anxiety is your inability to understand death and come to terms with it, you know. So you'll see it in California. It's very prevalent with like the vitamins industry, you know, with Botox and plastic surgery, with old folks' homes and the taboos around saying the word death on Thanksgiving dinner table, you know, our reluctance to speak of death, our preponderance for pseudonyms about death. Oh, he passed away. Sorry, honey, your goldfish is in a better place. You know, like all of our pseudonyms, all of our activities, if you look closely enough, you will see that somehow, in some sense, they are related to this fundamental issue, death, and our inability to come to terms with it. We don't know what it is, we don't know what will happen when the body dies, and so we do our best to distract ourselves from having to answer that question. Caleb says, so you're telling me my goldfish died? The Easter Bunny myth, the Santa Claus myth. No, Caleb, I'm not here to tell you anything. Don't believe a word I say. Just the drunken fool rambling at you. Okay, so if we look at the root of it, we see that spirituality, first and foremost, must answer your query about death. It must answer to you in a way that checks out in reason, but can also be verified through your experience. What is death and what happens to you when the body dies? Just mere promises won't do it alone. You know, so, thank you, RYN. So remember, most religions that is exoteric institutions of spiritual learning, most of them accrue huge amounts of power because they're based off an economy of assuaging fear. That is, they peddle to you beliefs that make you feel a little better about death. They say, don't worry, there is an afterlife. Just take my word for it. When the body dies, you'll be able to hang out with some virgins. You'll be able to drink some milk and honey ad infinitum in this eternal Sunday realm, if you will. It will always be Sunday, and you'll hang out with Morgan Freeman, God. Yes, I always make these references to 2000s movies, and they always fall flat, so excuse that. But there are these promises about death, but here's the deal. You don't really believe them. And in fact, there is nothing that's really very convincing about them. It's hard to accept that there is this eternal Sunday realm of milk and honey. It's even harder to accept this now when much of the myths of religion are being overturned. And a big mistake that a lot of these religions make were being literal. So no longer are their gospels symbolic, poetic, and artful expressions of an eternal truth. They become literal doctrines of literal figures who lived in literal places. And when historical studies and when scientific studies ultimately show that those people didn't live in those places at those times, the entire structure falls down. The house of cards has been destroyed by the big bad wolf of science, so to speak. And so less and less are these beliefs about death believable. And even if you look at the most devout religious person, you will find a cognitive dissonance. Because on the surface, they say they believe these aphorisms about death, but if you investigate their actions, they act in ways that are really self-preserving. There's a kind of cognitive dissonance that pervades entire religious structures. And that's why many of people have turned away from them. So the problem inherent in religion is that our religious leaders cannot answer the questions that are most important to answer. The moment you start interrogating them about this book or that book, they're dead ends. And the ultimate answer is just take it on faith. And they get a bit scared the moment you start asking questions, and they say to you, but the devil knows the Bible better than you. And then, all intellectual inquiry is ended at that point. So, people are turning away from those structures of power because they're not able to offer believable answers. And this is endemic to every religious institution. Hindus are supposed to accept the existence of gods on faith. They're supposed to accept Vaikuntha and Punya and Karma. Christians are supposed to accept notions of heaven and hell, and all of that. So this is certainly endemic to every religious institution. Okay, so we're not able to answer the question of death. Now, science has taken up this question, but science as we know it today is primarily oriented towards understanding the world outside without really saying much about the world inside. One rebuttal we can offer to these enlightened scientists is, if you are so smart, why are you so sad? So what? You are able to follow with precision the movement of a certain comet, yet you remain numb to the movements of your own heart. Can't even have a conversation with a Tinder date, without mansplaining some quantum mechanics and not getting laid that night. Do you see there's a little bit of a trope with the science camp? They're overly heady, hiding behind these intellectual concepts, but there's no juice there. There's a lot of sadness, a lot of depression, a lot of frustration. Even there's a cognitive dissonance, I think there's a beautiful Rumi poem. I'm going to paraphrase it. Rumi says something like this. What's the value in knowing the price of everything in the marketplace if you do not know even the worth of your own soul? Kind of a dig at economists. Gonna use that line on my friend. So the idea is that people get really excited about scientific concepts, a life of the mind, but it ignores the life of the heart. So there can be a great level of depression. These ideas maybe describe the world in some way that allows us to do fancy things. And we get excited because we can light up a city for a year, if only to hide our fear of the dark, right? But what is this ability to light up cities? My mother eats cities for breakfast with her hurricane teeth and her cyclone tongue. Do not rest so smug in your civilizations. A flood is all it takes to crumble these walls that we covet so much. And it's during a time of like COVID when we realize, wow, things fall apart, as a famous poet once said. The center cannot hold. Yeats, yes. The center cannot hold. And for some reason we don't learn this lesson. We read Ozymandias Rex, we read the Shelley poem, and we realize that all monoliths of kings have fallen to rubble, and yet here we are, building new monoliths. You know, each tower that we build will crumble, yet we have faith in them. But, you know, here's the thing. The cognitive dissonance is that we know this. Deep down inside, we know our cities, although they can assuage us for a time, are ultimately vulnerable to nature, ultimately vulnerable to forces far greater than science. And we might cling on to what we call as materialistic optimism, that what we don't understand now, we might someday understand. Isn't that also a faith-based approach? Do you realize both approaches, religion and science, are both faith-based approaches? It's just that they put their stock in different things. And both of them feel a level of cognitive dissonance because you're not totally able to buy into their belief structures. Deep down inside, it's still not quite scratching the itch. Now, with science, for instance, with materialist science, here's our predicament. We live in a world, as we described a couple of lectures ago, that is predominantly unknowable. You know, 96% of this world, as our modern science reports, is made of this property, dark matter or dark energy, which sounds a little bit more dramatic than it is. It just means an unknowable quotient in the calculations of physics. You know, so we don't really know what it is, and we don't really know how to find out what it is. The Hadron Collider at CERN has been working on this a lot, but it's frustrating, you know. What is the Higgs boson? And so we've got that problem, dark matter, dark energy. Then, of the 4% of the world that is knowable, 99.9% of that is invisible. You know, it's interstellar dust that cannot really be seen. Of the 2% or 1%, 0.2 or 0.1% that can be seen, welcome Amanda, we call this the atomic universe. And don't worry, it's pretty large. Some trillions of inhabitable galaxies. It's a big portion of the universe. But of this 0.2%, that's made of atoms, most of these atoms too are becoming less and less believable to us as a theory. You know, so where before we could sleep at night trusting that the table was a thing, the moment we look at it we realize, no, this table is made of atoms, and Dalton's atom is replaced by Rutherford's atom, which is mostly empty space. Rutherford is replaced by Niels Bohr, who is replaced by modern quantum mechanics that say there aren't even electrons orbiting. It's just regions of electron probability known as clouds. The bicycle tire, you know, model. There's string theory. And basically this is to say that the more we look for matter, the more elusive it becomes. We know what matter does, but we don't know what matter is. We call this the hard problem of matter. Now you can compound that with what we call in philosophy the hard problem of consciousness, which is, look, I know all this about the world, but I'm sad. I know everything about the universe, but I know nothing about my own heart. I know nothing about the inner world. I'm hoping the outer world can tell me something about the inner world, but it hasn't yet. Okay, let's just science our way into the inner kingdoms. Let's try to isolate a thought. Let's try to figure out what consciousness is. So we hook up meditators to MRI machines, we give people some acid and we look through a telescope to see what happens in the brain. And we have some pretty sophisticated theories about like alpha waves and beta waves. You know, phrenology has come a long way from feeling for the bumps in people's heads to now looking at electrical impulses. But whether it's bumps or whether it's electrical impulses, we are still unable to show with any scientific precision what exactly a thought is or what exactly an emotion is. We can say, okay, neurosynaptic fibers firing, but that doesn't describe emotion. The word instinct is just a plug-in. It doesn't describe why we have ancestral memory, why the chick knows to be afraid of the eagle even though the mother hen hasn't taught it that. You know, we don't really understand why a mother is able to lift the car to save her baby. We don't really understand these isolated instances of near-death experiences in which people have out-of-body experiences. We try our best to reduce it to just the brain, this very elusive thing called the brain. And so we now are confronted with this model, which we take on faith. The brain produces awareness. The body makes the brain, and the brain produces awareness. But if you've been following so far, you know that matter is mostly empty space. So how can this emptiness be creating awareness? How can awareness be coming out of nothing? Actually, a very Buddhist notion. How is it that empty matter, which we are dividing into, elusive quarks, which we just now call flavors, how can this be giving us this? And how do we know? How do we know that consciousness emerges from the brain? What's our assurance? This, I think, humbly, is an axiom that we take on faith. Much like every other axiom we take on faith. The axioms of logic that Aristotle gave us. The axioms of Euclidean geometry that we got from Euclid. But spirituality begins, and this is really the start of spirituality. Spirituality begins when you're finally able to admit to yourself that you know nothing. Whether you're a faithful religious person who has believed in these concepts of heaven and God, at some point you realize they're not doing anything for me. I still suffer, I'm still angry, I know nothing. When you can say that, truthfully say, I really don't know this God of the Bible. I don't know the God of the Quran. I don't really understand the heaven of the Torah. When you can say that, that's when spirituality begins. Hi. Yay. When a scientist is able to look at the world around them and say, I can turn on a light and I can turn on a switch and light up a city, but I still am afraid of the dark. I still struggle in relationships. I still feel a sort of lack of meaning. I don't know. I don't get it. Only then does spirituality begin. So let's start with this. Your most genuine spirituality begins when you are finally ready to question all of your axioms about life. When you're finally ready to examine all of the unexamined assumptions that have been handed to you by the world in which you live. They've been handed to you by well-meaning parents, guardians, and society. They've been handed to you as part of this survival program that seems to do a good job of keeping the body alive here in the West, but for some reason stagnating the mind or the soul or the heart, what have you. So once you can do this, then you can say you're on the path, But unless you're able to admit wholeheartedly that you know nothing, that's your first obstacle. So, if we're looking for an interruption between knowledge and wisdom, that interruption is dogma, is belief, it's assumption, it's axiom, it's something that we irrationally hold on to because we're afraid of what will happen when we let go of it. What will happen to you really when you stop believing in the concept of a heaven or a God? What will really happen to you when you stop believing in the concept of matter and an emergent thing called consciousness that comes from matter? What's the real risk there? Investigate that. And underneath it, you'll see a fear of death. You're afraid to give up these beliefs because these beliefs protect you from uncertainty, which is ultimately what death is. So in Tantra, we call spiritual practitioners Vira. Vira means heroes or warriors because it takes a real heroic temperament to begin a spiritual quest. Because you might think you're the most enlightened person there is, and you come to an asana class and you realize just how much of a wimp you really are. Do you know what I mean? You might think like you're this ultimate enlightened being, and then you're asked to do a headstand and you're terrified. Just to go upside down for a moment, the prospect of falling over scares you to your very bones. What's the worth of your enlightenment? You really thought you were far along the path, and then your hamstring started to ache a little bit and you cried. A yogi once said, I have given you wisdom, and it is like a sword and a shield against grief and uncertainty. Yet you come back to me, having sustained a few slaps from the enemy, and now here you are crying. Ha! You see? So you really come to see where you're not when you take your spirituality onto the mat, into the world. That's why asana is good. The physical practice of spirituality really shows you truths about yourself that perhaps a mental practice was veiling you from. That's the nature of the mind. It likes to protect you from harsh truths. Then you might believe we are all one. We're all one, man. And then you go out into the world and someone gets your goat. Your parent says something about, so, do you have a job yet? And you're triggered. And gone is all this, we're all oneness. So we kind of come apart at the seams when our spirituality is put to the test. And often it's because we're clinging on to axioms. So that's the first step. root out every axiom you have about yourself and about the world. How do you know? Keep asking yourself this question. How do you know? I can't be a writer because nobody makes money as a writer. How do you know? Who told you that? And what's the evidence? My body is debilitated. I can't do this or that. How do you know? When my body dies, I will die. So start now the practice of always checking yourself. The moment you make a statement, ask the question, how do you know? And if someone says, Jesus is the Savior, how do you know? There is no God, how do you know? You see? So this kind of radical skepticism is not cynicism. It's not saying there is nothing that can be known. It's simply opening up yourself to the possibility that what you think you know isn't actually the way things are. And science understands this very well. Newtonian mechanics is different from Einsteinian mechanics. So you can't believe in both at the same time. In Newtonian mechanics, gravity is a force between two massive bodies. Not so in Einsteinian mechanics. In Einstein's worldview, gravity is really about a distortion in the space-time matrix when big objects make dents in it. They're two very different theories, yet we use them both in different places. When you want to find Halley's Comet, use Newton. When you're studying quantum mechanics, use Einstein. The very fact that science is able to maintain two mutually exclusive theories at the same time is because implicitly the project of Western material science understands that science can be instrumentally true without being ontologically true. And let's unpack what we mean by that. Just because something works, just because we know what something does, doesn't mean we know what it is. Just because you can use electricity, just because you know the effects or consequences of electricity, says nothing about how much you know about electricity. So you might know nothing about metaphysics or ontology, yet be very well versed in technology. Do you see the distinction? So just because something works doesn't mean it's true. So that's why we open ourselves up to the possibility of not knowing. This being comfortable with uncertainty is a beautiful place to be. So what is science then? If science is to you a body of knowledge or a series of axioms that you buy into, then what you have is no better than religion, is no better than a dead-end dogma complex. But science at its best is a method. It's a radically empowering method to be put into the hands of each and every person so they can go on their own quest for discovery. As such, all Buddhist meditation, all yoga, all genuine spiritual practice, all Sufi practice, all Christian mysticism is a science. Because it says to you, do not take anything on faith, find out for yourself. So the axioms become true when they become a lived experience for you. Right now you all intuit their truth, but soon it will be more than just that. Now remember, the founders of all the world religions also didn't take things on faith, mind you. They had actual experiences, perceptual experiences of divinity. Whether it was a burning bush speaking to them, whether it was an angel in the Thawar Mountains, Angel Jibril, giving the Surah Al-Ansa, the first surah that the Prophet Muhammad received, this wasn't a matter of faith. The Prophet Muhammad, Abraham, Moses, Jesus, all had direct personal experiences of divinity. The great mistake then is to presume that Jesus, the Buddha, the Prophet Muhammad, any spiritual leader is somehow different from you, that they're somehow special, that they possess qualities that you don't possess, that you will never be able to have a direct encounter with divinity. No, if you look closely at all of the world religions, the promise is that you will come to experience divinity if you practice correctly. So science says, don't take things on faith. What you're allowed to take on faith is a method. So a method is something that you have faith in provisionally in order to experience the outcome. So that's what an experiment is. Okay, so 1, question the axioms. 2, do not take those axioms on faith, but allow yourself some openness, some provisional faith in the methods that give you personal, direct verification for the truths that those methods espouse. All right. So let's look at a different model. Knowing that we're at a dead end in science, we call this the hard problem of matter, the hard problem of consciousness. Knowing that we're at a dead end in religion. There's no formal philosophical word for this dead end. Let's just call it the hard problem of the clueless rabbi. The hard problem of your spiritual leaders not being able to answer your questions. And also in the field of social sciences, we're encountering a problem where the world seems to be unsurpassably full of suffering. No matter how many charity organizations we start, no matter how many humanitarian missions we initiate, it's like whack-a-mole, you know? Every mole you whack, a new one appears. There's actually even a story, an Indian story that Swami Vivekananda recounts in his book Karma Yoga. He says one day there was a man who learnt about the possibility of acquiring a ghost, a supernatural power, acquiring a ghost who would do his work for him. And he was told that if one were to acquire a ghost, he could have all of his desires fulfilled, because the ghost would see to it that every one of his needs was met. So, the man searched far and wide, looking for someone who could teach him how to conquer a ghost, how to get his own personal ghost, So one day he meets a yogi, and he says to the yogi, "You are a great and powerful sage. Can you give me a ghost?" And the yogi looks at him with disgust and say, No, my child. Have no interest in these occult abilities. They won't serve you. Just focus on your own spiritual practice. And the man said, "No, please, please." And he's crying and he's weeping. And the yogi, finally, in order to get rid of this man, said, Fine, I'll teach you. I'll give you a mantra. You go into the forest late in the night at this time, 3:33 or whatever. You chant the mantra and you will obtain a ghost. The ghost will be at your service. But I must warn you. Oh, hello. I must warn you, if you acquire a ghost, you must not allow this ghost to be without a task. That's the disclaimer. If this ghost becomes restless, if you don't give it a task, it will devour you whole. And the man says, "Are you kidding? My desires are inexhaustible. This ghost is going to be the busiest ghost in the world. I'm going to put it to work, bro. Just you wait and see." And the guru says, "Yeah, fine. And this man, now that he's empowered with the mantra, goes into the forest late at night and he begins to chant. In all seriousness, he begins to chant. And lo and behold, a fearsome apparition appears before him. And the ghost says, "You have overpowered me with your mantra. I am now under your command. But if I am left idle, I will devour you." And the man says, "Fine, all right, let's get to work. Okay, first order of business. I want a palace made entirely of jewels." The ghost is like, snaps his fingers, the palace of jewels appears. And he goes, "Okay, cool. Now I want a harem full of the most beautiful courtesans." And the ghost goes, "Yep." And it appears. And he goes, "Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Fabricio." And he goes, "Okay. Now I want..." The man's getting kind of scared now because he realizes his desires weren't inexhaustible. He has fame, he has love, and he says, "Okay, I want to be the ultimate Maharaja of the entirety of this universe," and snaps the fingers, and he is. He's crowned king of all the seven realms, if you will. And then the man starts to get desperate, and he goes, okay, chop down this forest. And the ghost does that. He chops down the forest. And he goes, bring me some of this. And the ghost does that. And now the man realizes the predicament he's in. The ghost is able to fulfill his desires faster than he's able to have them. So he runs back to the yogi and he says, Guru, hi Grace. I'm so happy you're here. I was just with Grace. So the yogi runs back. He runs back to the yogi and he says, "Look, I got the ghost, but I've run out of desires. And he's going to eat me now. I have nothing left to tell the ghost." It's kind of like the Rick and Morty episode with the Me-6s. Yeah, so it's like that. And so the yogi says, didn't I tell you this was going to happen? Fine, here's what you do. You look at that dog, and the guy looks and he sees the dog, and he says, "Do you see how the dog's tail is curly?" He says, "Okay, yes, I see that. Ask the ghost to straighten the dog's tail." And the ghost appears in the cave and is about to devour the man, and the man says, "I have one more task for you. Straighten the dog's tail." And the ghost goes and he says, "Okay, fine." He straightens the tail, but when he releases it, the tail becomes curly again. And he straightens the tail, and he releases it, the tail becomes curly again. And no matter how many times he straightens the tail continues to become curly, and the dog just barks happily. And then the dog dies, and the tail continues to be curly, and the man is saved. And the ghost comes back to the man, and driven mad by this task of uncurling the dog's tail, he says, "Look, listen, I am a veteran ghost, G. I have been ghosting for a long time. I've been in this business longer than this civilization, and never have I encountered so futile a task. I tell you what, free me from your service, and I'll let you keep everything I've given you, and I promise I won't eat you. So the man releases him, and they're all happy. Happily ever after. Okay, so you see, this is a metaphor. The tail of the dog refers to the problems of the world. We literally call it nirvana fallacy in philosophy if you think you can end poverty, end HIV, end environmental destruction, and all of these things. The idea that you can permanently create a utopia is exactly the road to hell paved by good intentions that the missionaries of the 18th century and 19th century walked. They weren't out just to steal other people's resources, and they were actually moved by a genuine desire to help the world, to build railroads, to create hygiene, out of this desire to globalize the world, because that way we could all live in one global Starbucks. But any trip to Starbucks will show you the unhappiness there, Look at the 30-something-year-old who is throwing an absolute temper tantrum because the honey quotient isn't quite right. Look to Sweden and all of your powerful first world nations in which cradle to grave, welfare and all these systems are so developed, like in Singapore. Yet look at the depression. Look at the sadness. No amount of globalizing the world, of feeding people, of improving social institutions will really create lasting happiness. And we call this the straightening of the dog's curly tail. Yes? Okay, so here's our predicament. Our predicament is this. You see the world as separate from you. You see God as separate from you. You see consciousness as emerged. Yes, it is, Amanda. Does that mean we stop working for the world? No. In fact, next week we'll do a lecture on karma yoga. And we'll talk about work as spiritual practice. And hint, hint, kind of a spoiler for the upcoming episode. The reason you work to improve the world is not actually for the world. It's hubris to think that you can do anything. It's like dropping a cup of fresh water into an ocean, thinking you will unsalt the ocean in your lifetime, But it matters to this starfish, you know about that? No, it's about you. You work because it's a means for you to come into truth. And you'll see that hopefully next week. So that's a hint. Continue to work in the world. Continue to straighten the curly tail because it's actually beneficial to your own spirituality. Yes? Okay, so here's our predicament. If you believe God is up there in the sky, if you believe matter exists, if you buy into the unexamined assumptions of science, if you believe that your work is to end all suffering in the world, you come up against a lot of very frustrating dead ends. Religion is at a dead end, science is at a dead end, social work is at a dead end. Now, all of these ventures, all of these human enterprises, science, the quest for external truth, religion, the quest for internal truth, social science, the quest for the truth of interpersonal relationships, all of these ventures are doomed, perhaps because they're all premised on the wrong axioms. So, just as a thought experiment, just for fun, let's examine a different axiom. What if instead awareness as an emergent property from the brain, what if instead we said the brain was an emergent property from awareness? And again, don't take this on faith. Don't believe a word I say. Let's test it. Let's see if this is true. Let's apply it to our immediate experience of life here and now. And we've all done this experiment together before. Okay, bottle, Ayurvedic copper water bottle. A lot of you don't even have the concept Ayurvedic copper water bottle. You notice you live in a world of concepts. You look at something and you say tree. You have the concept tree. You look at grace and you have the concept angel. Okay. You look at people and you have concepts. But until you see the thing, you don't really have the concept. So a lot of people don't have the concept Tibetan singing bowl until I show them one. Now there is a concept in your mind, Tibetan singing bowl. Your world has been expanded. It's been meaningfully enriched because I've added a new concept. But what is the essence of concept? In other words, if you were to look at the very heart of a concept, what would you find? When we say essence, we mean that by which a thing cannot exist. The essence of a thing is the thing that allows it to be. So if we look at a concept, the essence of a concept, the one thing that no concept can be without is sensory experience. Sensation is the essence of concept. So this shape, this kind of texture, this color, this sound, these form the essence of the concept Tibetan singing bowl. This shape, the roundness, the length, the color, creates for you the concept water bottle, Ayurvedic copper water bottle. Okay, now, is there such a thing as Ayurvedic water bottle, the concept Ayurvedic water bottle, apart from the sensory data? You might say, yes there is. But no, look at this. Where did it go? Where is it? Is there such a thing here known as the concept of Ayurvedic copper water bottle? And you might say, no, it's in my memory. How good is that worth? What is memory really? We have in, psychology, something known as the loft-bus paradigm. So if you're interested to see the kind of ephemeral quality of memory, you can look at this study. It's a very interesting way to show how people usually remember falsely and how memory is not really a reliable source of information. So you shouldn't be basing anything on faith, right? Let's just deal with things as you see them. Don't have faith in memory either. Don't have faith in any authority. Just interact with your immediate perception of this experience. The concept Ayurvedic water bottle does not exist apart from the sensation of this one. Now we ask the second question. What is the essence of the sensation? What is that by which sensation occurs? And the answer is obviously sense organs, sight, the perception. So perceiving is the essence of a perception experience. Now we can experiment with this too. Close your eyes. Is there such a thing as the shape, color, and sound of this thing apart from your perception of it? You might say yes, but again you're appealing to memory and you're appealing to some level of faith. If you truly interact with this experiment without dealing with faith, by just examining your immediate perception here and now, it seems that in your perceptual experience, the essence of all concepts is sensation, and the essence of all sensation is sensing. If you didn't have the faculty of sensing, no amount of Ayurvedic copper water bottles could exist. Do you realize? This is also why some of you don't have concepts for things you haven't yet seen, even though they have been there before your eyes. Isn't that funny? Sometimes I can put something in front of you and you won't even see it. That shows you that there's something else going on. Behind sensation, there is one other thing, and that is awareness. Without that awareness, you wouldn't have sensation. It doesn't matter how many sets of eyes you have. You could have 200 eyes. You could have as many arms as one of those Hindu deities, that Christian missionaries love to mock. It doesn't matter how many limbs, how many eyes, how many tongues you have. If you don't have awareness, you're not able to experience anything. So obviously, the root of all concepts, and if you follow this closely, you can verify it here and now. The root of all concepts is sensation. The root of all sensation is sensing, and the root of all sensing is awareness. Without awareness, none of those things could be. How do you test this? Very simple. Show me one thing that exists apart from your awareness. Can you do it? Can you prove the existence of anything apart from awareness? You might say, duh, I can. What about that distant star that you can't see? Is that not also in your awareness? I mean, the concept, distant star, is that not in awareness? You say, Nish, come on, let's be real. If we all left this room, are you trying to tell me this room no longer exists because no one is around to be aware of it? I can prove to you that this room exists apart from people with awareness. Let me show you. And you say, let's go. We all get up and we all step out of the room and you set up a video camera and you videotape the room and we all leave and we come back and then you show me your footage and you're like, aha, look at that. The room is here. Nobody was in it, yet the camera doesn't lie, right? The room is here. Okay, but even the data of camera displaying room is in awareness. Do you not see the predicament? Nothing can be shown to exist apart from awareness. So if you say the body creates consciousness, you're taking something on faith. You're saying that the body can exist apart from consciousness/awareness. But you haven't yet been able to show me that this is true, except by faith, you know? I'm just supposed to believe the mind produces awareness, when in fact my perceptual experience shows me the opposite. Nothing exists apart from awareness. Let's go a little further, friends. What about your body? What is a body? And for a lot of us, a body is nothing more than a concept. You know, we look into a mirror and we say, that's my body, you know. But any anorexic will tell you what she sees is not actually what's there, you know. You look at Instagram, you look at a photo, you realize that you have a concept of body that has nothing to do with your actual body. So let's examine now. Don't take anything on faith. Don't take any concepts on faith. Don't let anybody tell you what your body is or isn't. Let's just investigate now together what a body really is. Is the body, and here's my proposal, is the body really anything more than moment-to-moment sensation experiences? You know. So follow this closely. What you consider to be a body, is it really anything more than the taste of tea, than the stretch of the hamstrings, than the feeling of sweat in the armpits? I don't know, whatever sensation you might be able to experience, that's what a body is, isn't it? The body is a mass of sensation. In the piano incident, you might have a near-death experience and float above yourself and be aware of you on the ground. Yeah, we have all these interesting things, and Anisha says B theory of time. Yes, time is a concept. Exactly. So, oh, yes, no, I'm happy. Please, continue. So, it seems like you cannot show the existence of anything apart from awareness. The body is nothing more than a sensation within awareness. And what do you know about sensation? It comes and it goes. Sensation is in you. When you taste the tea, when you look at a tree, oh, I love that rhyme scheme there, unintentional. It's a kind of event that happens in your mind. There's something, let's just say there's something in the world. Let's just take the world on faith. There's something out there that creates some kind of effect on the retina, some kind of effect on the tongue. And then my mind assigns an image, tree or tea. And while that's going on in the mind, your awareness is just the ground in which this sensation comes and goes. But look at this. You can try it now. If you have some tea nearby, you can pick up the tea, sip it, cheers, and notice what's going on. When you sip the tea, there is, for a moment, the emergence of a sense event. Not wine, Fabricio. There is for a moment a flavor. It comes, so to speak, out of nowhere. You suddenly taste something. That flavor sticks around for a little while, and then it totally disappears. Sensation arises and disappears. Yet, your mind, that is, the ability for you to perceive, seems to be unaffected. It's not like your mind ended with the sensation, right? You were ready for the next sensation. After you sipped your tea and after the flavor of tea vanished, there was a new sensation, which is the sound of this drunken monkey's voice. The sound of your refrigerator humming. The texture of your cloth resting so lovingly on your skin. It seems like you persist at the end of sensation. If your body, follow this closely, if your body is nothing more than a mass of sensations, why do you believe, having now had the perceptual experience of surviving the end of sensation, why do you believe that the end of the body sensation is necessarily the end of you? It's infallible logic premised on your immediate perception of here and now. It takes nothing on faith. Good night, Anisha. Thank you so much for coming. Yes. All of this will be available on the Patreon tonight. So if you do have to go, don't worry, we have the recording, and it's always going to be here for you. So thank you. So let's change the perspective now. If we see the awareness as emerging from the body, then you have something very real to fear. You fear death. You fear the death of your loved ones because you actually believe that when your loved one's body dies, they die. You know, and that causes a lot of anxiety. Then you get obsessed with money. Because remember how we said in the beginning of the lecture, the desire to increase your wealth is really an obsession with security. And obsession with security is really just not being able to deal with death. Not being able to understand what death is. And so you're doing your best to preserve your life. You know, because you see, if the body dies, you'll die, right? So you need to have lots of money. Because if you don't have $30,000 in your saving accounts right now, you won't be able to eat. And then you will die. You know, so when you lose money, it actually feels like a threat to your life. When someone disagrees with you, or you lose followers, or you feel a sense of obscurity, it actually feels like you're dying. It feels like a threat to your existence. Because you have premised your existence on the body and on the mind. But if you just flip the paradigm, and it's not something you take on faith, if you can just feel into the truth here and now of the body being in awareness as opposed to awareness being in the body, then immediately you can relax. And ultimately, that's why this philosophy is the most practical out there, because it allows you to first and foremost deal with death in a way that frees you from the fear of it. You know, okay, we'll go a little further, adding one more concept. Last week, we did the dreamer, the sleeper, and the waker. We won't do that again today. But okay, so Yash asked a good question. Can't you do a control test to verify this? That's exactly what we just discussed. You know, so we just said, yeah, a lot of people try. You can set up a camera, and okay, we've controlled all the variables. There's no consciousnesses in the room. There's no one present to perceive the room. Yet the camera perceived it. But isn't the data still in awareness? And here's a trap. It's very easy to conflate awareness with the mind. But we won't really get into that nuance yet. We will in a little bit. Because now let's just try to get through some of this theory. I want to offer one more to you. It won't be the dreamer and the sharp hot. It won't be the dreamer and the dream. Like most of you already realize that when you are in the dream world, you really believe that that's reality. You know, you forget all about your waking world problems and you buy into your dream completely. Similarly, in this dream, in the waking dream, you buy into the reality of this completely. But all of it disappears when you enter deep sleep. Now, when you think about a mind, what you call a mind is merely one of three flavors of awareness. So follow this closely. To you, the mind is really just your waking experience of life. You know. Now, that's usually what we refer to as mind. My mind is able to perceive my waking world problems. I have waking world relationships. But then when you go into sleep and you go into dream, you forget all about your wife, husband, friend. You forget all about your savings account. You forget everything that was real to you when you were awake. And you enter a new kind of reality, which is called the dream reality. And you might say, okay, that's also still the mind. But what about deep sleep? In deep sleep, there is an absence of the waking dream, and there is also an absence of the dream, yet you're still there. And if this is not the case, you should be surprised every time you wake up after deep sleep. But you're not. Every time you wake up after having slept dreamlessly, you usually yawn and sigh with contentment and say, ah, I slept like a log. Now, the only thing you should ask is, who is that I? Who is the I that is now reporting to me an absence of the ego? Meaning, that I was not Nish. Nish is only real in the waking dream. When Nish goes to sleep, he's like Jimmy Page or something, you know, playing in Led Zeppelin in the dream world. But in deep sleep, Nish is not Nish, nor is he even Jimmy Page. Yet there remains some level of individuality there. So this is how we distinguish awareness from the mind. There are three flavors of awareness. You might think that you are in the dream, but when you wake up from the dream, you realize the dream was in you. This gives you tremendous relief. It doesn't matter how bad your dream is. When you wake up, you're like, none of that was real. Do you notice that? You often wake up from a dream relieved because it's not real. And it's not real because it was just in you. Similarly, when you go into deep sleep, the waking self dissolves too. So ultimately, we're able to conclude this. And this is our conclusion. Awareness contains waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. Good night, Christina. Thank you for coming. Awareness contains waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. Your awareness is not the mind of waking, nor is it the mind of dreaming, nor is it the no mind of deep sleep. It is the one that is aware of all three. So here's the first practical idea for you. The problem is remembering it, but to remember something, you must first be exposed to it. So here's a first practical kind of insight. Notice that this is an object. This is a seen object. The eyes are the one that is seeing the object. So the eyes are the seer. It's very obvious to you now that the seer and the seen are different. Yes, this is a given. I am not the bottle. I am the one looking at the bottle. So there is a difference between the seer and the seen. Next, don't you notice that while the seen are a plurality, the seer is one? So you kind of sense that you are one thing, whereas the world is many things. The world is the seen, your eyes are the seer. So now you say to yourself, I am not the world. I am this one. Yes, Beth, and you are God, as you will soon see. I am this one, and this is the world. So if you follow this line of reasoning, the seer and the seen are different, and the world is the seen, the world of plurality is seen by a kind of unity, you will arrive at a very interesting conclusion. If the seer is different from the seen, and if the bottle is the seen and my eyes are the seer, this is very subtle philosophy, so just maybe marinate in the mystery of it if it's not immediately available to you. But the seen is different from the seer. But who is seeing my eyes? So surely there is something in me, my mind, that is able to stand in relation to my eyes the same way my eyes stand in relation to the cup or the bottle. So that means I'm not my eyes, since I am able to see my eyes. It's very subtle. Don't worry. This is not really a Vedanta class. I'm kind of moving through some of these theories very quickly. So in one fell swoop, if I agree that the seer and the seen are different, and if I agree that the seen are many but the seer is one, I have in one fell swoop proven to you now that you are not the body. You are the one that is aware of the body. And you might say, okay, the mind is aware of the body, so I'm the mind, right? No. There is